Hello and welcome to today's webinar, part 2 of the Cloud Economics and FinOps series, FinOps Inform Phase, brought to you by our Insight Managed Services team in partnership with Microsoft. I'm Claire Folger, your CSP Marketing Coordinator at Insight, and I will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. The webcast console you are looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. All questions from this webcast will be captured, and there will be a Q&A during the last few minutes of the presentation. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. I also wanted to remind you that you have the chance to win a copy of the O'Reilly book, Cloud FinOps, today based on your participation. Attend all 4 sessions and get a chance to win free access to take the FinOps Certified Practitioner exam, a $300 value. This webinar series, along with the book, will give you a solid foundation to work toward passing the FinOps Practitioner certification. After today's session, our lucky winners will receive an email from me with details on receiving their free copy of the book. I would now like to turn this presentation over to our presenters, Marcus and Jeff. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Claire. All right. And thank you all for attending today. My name is Marcus Benson. I'm a National Principal Architect for FinOps here at Insight and a former Azure Global Black Belt for cost management. And with me, I have Jeff Amos. Jeff, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Marcus. My name is Jeff Amos. I'm a cloud financial architect here at Microsoft, kind of a unique role that we've created over the last year or so. You could think about my activities as being a data center architect that likes to do his own taxes. So I help customers figure out how cash flows change as they modernize and migrate workloads over to the cloud, and what impact that looks like to budgetary allocations as well as cost projections. So it's a pleasure presenting with Marcus today.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. All right, so today's discussion is really going to be a deep dive discussion focused in around the FinOps Inform phase. So last time we got together, we talked about the FinOps methodology as a whole, as well as the difference between FinOps and cloud economics, and also how there are synergies between the two. So today we're going to cover a lot around creating the right level of visibility, reporting. We're going to talk a little bit about data sources, that feed into those reports, Showback and Chargeback methodologies and models, budgeting and alerting capabilities within the Microsoft Azure platform, as well as anomaly detection and some common FinOps KPIs that you might want to start thinking about as you start to mature your practice. After that, we're going to actually deliver a demo of one of the reporting tools during this session. I'll provide you with some information on where to go to learn more, and provide you with some additional resources to help along your journey. All right, so the FinOps Inform phase, once again, is really all around creating the right level of visibility for your organization across multiple personas, potentially within your FinOps team or within your cloud practice. One of the biggest or most important activities around the FinOps Inform phase is helping your users and your engineering teams understand their fully loaded costs. And what that means is not just the costs that they're incurring within their own Azure subscriptions, but also potentially any shared service costs, IT uplift for central IT services, anything like that that they might actually get billed back at the end of the month. That might not be included in, their specific reporting at their subscription level. Creating the right level of visibility into spend through chargeback and showback methodologies also helps to create accountability across your organization, as do creating the right level of scorecards, KPIs, and identifying the metrics that matter to your team. With scorecards, with that right visibility, you can really provide that right level of information to your business unit teams to really manage their own spend properly and be, the best stewards of their environments. We'll talk a little bit about tagging strategy and why that's so important from a cost reporting standpoint. Also, just resource consistency in general. So naming standards, account hierarchies, all of those are important. Trend and variance analysis. We're going to talk a little bit about budgets, anomaly detection, and some benchmarking tools that you can use to find out where you're at today.
And keep in mind as you digest some of the information that we're sharing today, and as you create that plan to really target that fully loaded cost and create these new KPIs, I find that a lot of customers go through iterations or waves of sorting through what their costs are. Like we may not have that fully loaded cost right up front when we start a modernization or migration of workloads. But as time moves forward and we work through the migration period, we'll start sorting through more accurate numbers and that are representative of where the workloads are today and where the workloads are migrating to. So keep in mind that we're not telling you to digest the whole elephant right off the bat, but start putting in reasonable numbers or even benchmark numbers initially that we could refine over time and get more accurate as we move forward.
Excellent. All right, so one of the first steps to creating, the right amount of visibility or right level of visibility in your environment is through governance and through a strong cloud adoption framework. Without proper visibility, you will always have waste in your environment, and without proper governance, you're going to have cost reports that really aren't all that valuable, or at the accuracy that you need for things like Showback or Chargeback. So you really need to start to think about designing some of these governance pieces with cost in mind. So things like management group structure and organization, that really should map to your organizational structure and how these teams need to consume, their costs and Showback and Chargeback capabilities. You need to be designing subscriptions and accounts with cost in mind as well. So strong naming standards go a long ways with subscription naming to identify where those workloads belong, who actually owns those, and who's responsible for managing those resources. Resource groups and applications, another very, very important level to think about from a financial perspective. What are the tagging standards that you want to have on your resources, and at what level are those going to be applied? Some tags should be applied probably at the management group at that higher level, while some tags like application tags or owner tags, for example, may need to be applied at that resource group level or that lower level. And a lot of that can be done through Azure policy. So start thinking about ways that you can help take some of these responsibilities off of your engineers and architects' plates and automate some of these capabilities through strong naming standards and tagging policy through Azure policy.
And a good methodology to think about in and around tagging your resources is mapping them to some of the financial internal tools you have. For example, the cost or profit centers attached to different business units or IT organizations, and tagging the resources or meters that are deployed to Azure with those cost centers or profit center identifiers. And you're starting to map back into that financial workflow that you may have internally. It's a great first step. And as Marcus mentioned, also adding tags in for specific workloads, or even tagging them as dev test and those transient type of workloads. Another great suggestion that I ran across with a customer recently in around tags is perhaps add a tag for when you may deprovision that particular group of meters. Historically, operations has been very good about deploying resources, but deprovisioning or taking offline resources has always been a historic challenge. So start thinking about what you may do with those group of meters 2 years down the road and set a time frame to revisit those as a potential tag, resource tag.
Yeah, and definitely utilize the cloud provider best practices within the cloud adoption frameworks. Every major cloud provider has their own version of the cloud adoption framework with suggestions and best practices on how to leverage tagging, naming, and some of these other resource consistency capabilities. So first poll question for the group, do your governance and FinOps teams collaborate and work together to align on governance strategy and initiatives today? So we'll give you all a minute to get your answers in.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I always viewed the FinOps team as kind of that marriage counselor between the CTO and the CFO organization.
Yeah, and there was one question that already came in. Why is decommissioning a challenge? Well, in a lot of cases, without that tagging data or without that additional metadata, teams sometimes forget about resources. And, if that, resource or resource group is no longer needed, having that expiration date or decom date tagged in there can allow you to actually create automation to shut those down or destroy those automatically so that the resource owners don't have to remember to turn those off or shut those down at the end of that project.
Yeah, and decommissioning, and I was once on the Xbox Live operations team, and we would deploy resources, and as soon as they're up and running and we have like whatever consumer of that resource happy and good to go, we kind of let it run. We didn't have a process at the time to actually, or even alerts at the time, to revisit that workload within a certain time frame. And historically, it's been kind of an operational challenge. You want to deploy a resource catering to a business unit request, but you tend to forget, well, maybe we need to revisit that resource 2 years down the road to make sure that, one, it's still in use, or it's useful for the business, or if it's time to actually revisit offlining that resource or decommissioning it.
Great. So we've got some results in. It looks like a lot of the folks on the call are unsure if the collaboration between the governance and FinOps teams is going on. If you recall from our first discussion a couple of weeks ago, one of the most important concepts of FinOps and guiding principles of FinOps is that it requires collaboration between these potentially siloed teams. So once you create that resource consistency and have the right resource hygiene in your environment, you can really start to create more meaningful reports. And it's very, very important that you create meaningful reports. Again, that's actually one of the additional guiding principles of FinOps is reports need to be accessible, timely, and meaningful. So when you're creating these reports, you just have to think about the audiences that you have in mind. Not every audience is going to care about the same information, the same data. So you really need to start thinking about your reporting in a persona-based methodology. So what do our executives care about? What do our finance folks care about? What do the product, engineering, and resource owners care about? This could be 3 different dashboards or 3 different sets of reports that are set up for these 3 different groups of users that all care about potentially different things with regards to the cost data in the cloud. You need to enable your users through having daily, monthly, quarterly, and annual visibility into spend. This will help with anomaly detection, with trending, with forecasting, with showback reporting, as well as efficiency reporting for those resource owners themselves. And there is a screenshot here of one of the capabilities and dashboards that are available to you as a Microsoft Azure user at no cost. And we're going to talk about this in a second here, but there are a few different native reporting options for you within Microsoft Azure itself. There is the native cost management tool within the Azure portal, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail later in the call. There's the native connectors for Power BI. So if you are a Power BI shop or you utilize Power BI, you can go to Get Data and you can go to the Azure connectors, and there is a native cost management connector that you can leverage, as well as custom APIs. So you can leverage any of the Azure APIs to pull down this data and this information as well as pull in additional data sources to bring in maybe performance data to marry into your cost data, or maybe some additional data sources that like a CMDB that may be useful. And so one of the tools that's available is the Azure Cost Management Power BI template app. This is built around that native cost management connector within Power BI. It is available at no cost today for EA customers. Today, unfortunately, and a Power BI Pro license, is required to install and to use the app. So just be aware of those couple of things before, you go and try to use it. And if you don't have EA access, EA reader access, you will not be able to connect to the data. So you do need to have that EA admin account, even if it's just read-only, to access this reporting. Also, the reporting is not customizable. So if you do want to modify this or build your own custom reports, you'll need to use that native cost management connector. All right, Jeff, I'm going to hand it over to you if you want to dive into a quick demo.
Excellent. Let me bring that up. Cool. So hopefully it's showing on your side. So this is the Azure Cost Management application plugin for Power BI. So I'm actually logged into my PowerBI.com account. And it's already connected to a sample set of data, so we could actually check out some reports and see what's in here. Now, as mentioned, this particular Azure Cost Management app is a little restrictive in that it has those pre-created reports. But keep in mind that every one of these tabs that we see on the left side is a data feed that you could either hit natively from your Power BI desktop application in through the Azure Cost Management plugin, or directly through the APIs. Depending on how much depth and how deep you want to go on customizing the reports, those resources are super helpful. So within the application, we start with the overview. What's my spend day over day? And what does it look like? Based off of subscription names, or even broken down by resource groups that are within those subscriptions. So it gives me a great high-level overview. Then I can also break it down by overall subscription. So if I have an enterprise agreement with multiple subscriptions in it, I could see where the cash flow is going, to which team, which organization that is attached to that particular subscription. Also super helpful is some of the views where, what are my top cost drivers? Is it storage? Is it the VMs? Or is it some of the application or PaaS level meters? And really doing a deep dive into that. Keeping in mind, again, that these are pre-created or canned reports. So if we want to do that deeper dive, we can also connect into that native connector and through the Power BI desktop and create those custom reports that may cater to specific KPIs that are more of a concern for me in a focus area. Next, another super helpful one is the Azure Hybrid Benefit Usage tab. Am I leveraging the license entitlement for portability in through my enterprise agreement to get the best benefit of what I'm deploying out to Azure? This also applies to Windows Server licensing as well as some SQL licensing as well, depending on the level of agreement that you have. It also covers some RI information, the reserved instances. Am I applying the right cost construct or consumption construct, be it either pay-go or 1 or 3 year RIs? And what is my potential cost benefit if I make a change? So I could do some quick analysis in through these particular views. Even looking at the RI savings opportunities. What am I doing today versus what can I then charge back potentially into the business unit? Also super helpful and attached to the enterprise agreements is the price sheet API data feed. This is every meter inside of Azure. So if I wanted to do what if scenarios of moving a workload from within a VM to some of the PaaS level meters, maybe moving a SQL instance that's currently running within a VM to maybe a managed SQL instance, I could go to this customized price list based off of my enterprise agreement and look at what those cost constructs may look like. So again, super handy tool, that plugin, the application plugin for PowerBI.com, allowing you to do the Azure cost management. But again, it is kind of that trunk wrap experience, that canned or managed experience. And all of these data sets are accessible and customizable through the Power BI desktop. And as Marcus mentioned, most certainly through the native APIs, depending on how you want to tie this into your current workflow or even financial management or budgetary management tools internally.
Excellent.
Cool.
Thank you for that, Jeff. All right, so hopefully that helped give you some additional information and potentially an additional tool in your tool set to help you visualize your spend. So there's a lot of tool options today out there for clouds, for various cloud providers. The really important thing to note is there's really no silver bullet. There's no one tool that kind of does everything really, really well. And most of our clients that we're talking to, are relying on a mix of tooling. And this is actually some data from the State of FinOps report 2022. If you go to data.finops.org, there's some really good information there around the state of FinOps and some typical metrics around average team sizes, team roles, that kind of thing, skills. But it's important to note here that native tools are still really the most commonly used, along with potentially additional tools. So what kind of reporting or spend tools does your organization use today? Native, homegrown, third party, multiple tool sets, or if you're not sure, there's an option for not sure as well. So we'll give folks a minute or two to get your responses in.
And when you think about tools, even third-party tools or internally customized ones, always focus on the end goal, that KPI. What are we measuring? What is an impactful KPI to measure for the business? Is it, in part, a lot of times, financial success? Are we able to do more with every dollar of investment over time? That's a fantastic KPI. Can we do more transactions into transactional stores for either the same or less investment into the IT infrastructure? So certainly keep the end goals in mind. I work with a lot of customers that went out and already purchased a third-party tool, and they're trying to fit it back into their own KPI measurements, which is kind of a reverse process. So certainly keep the end goals in mind as you're looking at those different solutions.
Great, thanks for that, Jeff. So it looks like the majority of this group is right in line with the State of FinOps group, which is showing that 40% of you are utilizing multiple tools. And a lot of native, homegrown, actually no third party, that's surprising. But this does line up with what we would expect to see. So moving into the next topic, which is Showback and Chargeback. So once you create that visibility, you have those reports in place, you've got your tagging in place. How do you create that accountability, and how do you drive the right level of reporting to those business unit teams? Typically, that's going to be done through Showback or Chargeback reporting. And the difference is, Barry Whittle from Apptio says it best here, Showback leaves a bill on the table for analysis. Chargeback leaves the same bill but requires payment. So Showback is really, the same thing as Chargeback, except you're not collecting payment at the end, but still does require, that solid cost model that you need to have in place and built, potentially a plan for shared service costs, and additional questions that you need to ask yourself to really monitor and manage this ongoing. The important thing is there's really no one model that fits all clients. So there's a lot of different shared service cost models out there that you can leverage, proportional based, fixed based, central IT models where central IT takes all the shared costs. So there's different ways to do it depending on how your organization operates. Probably the most common model that we see from clients is the proportional model. So if business unit A is spending 5% of the total cloud spend, they're going to get 5% of those shared service costs as well. Other challenges, the way engineers tag resources doesn't always align to the way finance needs to see those reports. Capitalization can throw that off as well. Tags are case sensitive. So if someone throws in a capital P for prod and the rest of the environment is using all lowercase, then they're going to have two separate tags that need to be reconciled. We've talked a little bit about the shared cost piece as well. Amortization of RI benefits is very important to think about as well during this process. Typically, you're not going to want to show your RI charges and all upfront fees to businesses because that's going to throw off their monthly bill. But if you amortize that cost throughout the period, the term of that RI or that reservation, it'll allow them to be a lot more effective in monitoring their spend, identifying anomalies without having those huge spikes every month or every year for those RI charges.
And there was a question in the chat, is there a view for amortization or cash view? And I think that was based off of the quick demo I was doing. And certainly with respect to what you just mentioned about RIs, the short answer is yes. There is a data feed. There's an API that you could pull from. And I wasn't sure if that was represented in that. Oh, no, it's not represented in the short demo I did. But it is available through the Azure Cost Management plugin for the Power BI desktop, where you do get that view. So, for example, if you pay for an RI upfront, a 1 or 3 year commitment, it will show you that distributed amortization type of cost. And to Marcus's point, that's a great measurement from a finance perspective, because that's how they view that particular purchase over the term of the agreement versus entirely upfront. So the data set certainly is there and available.
Yeah, when you connect to the Power BI native connector, you'll see that there are 2 usage details tables, one that comes through as usage details and one that's usage details amortized. All right, so one of the other best ways to control spend and to create that accountability in your environment is to utilize budgets and alerting. And there are some native capabilities within Microsoft Azure today that allow you to set budgets. Jeff, I know that you have a great use case as well for budgets that you'll mention here in a second, but budgets within the Azure Cost Management tool within the portal are pretty flexible. You can change your scope to really any level of your environment. You can scope your budgets at the organizational level, at management group levels, at subscription levels, down to individual resource groups, even on individual tags. So if you have a project tag or something like that that has a fixed budget, you can enter those here and track the burn down of those budgets over time. You can set these up to be monthly, annual, quarterly. You can set them up to expire over a certain period of time. If you revisit your budget every year and reset your budget every year, maybe you want this to expire on an annual basis, or maybe you actually, manage and monitor and change and iterate on your budget quarterly, which, isn't uncommon in the cloud. But this allows you to set those expirations for budgets and continue to iterate on those. The tool will actually suggest a budget as well based on your forecast. So we'll look at your spend and give you a linear forecast and then create a suggested budget based off of that. And you can also get alerts based on actual against the budget, forecasted utilization of the budget. And you can create some conditions off of these alerts, like setting up action groups. So if you had a dev or a sandbox environment that you wanted to have a hard budget on and you don't want it to go over that, you could set that up to actually create and trigger an action group to shut that environment down once it hits a certain percentage or threshold of that budget.
Cool. And the quick example I have, we had a large governmental organization in North America that received a lot of credits for Azure consumption. So in essence, they agreed to a certain spend in a certain time frame, and based off of that, we provided them discounts and credits against their particular consumption. Now, this actually created a problem for them because, one, they would receive an invoice, it would be settled, and then the credit would be applied. So they used this budgetary tool to actually track what consumption they have against the credits, so they knew what the settled invoice would look like in the end. So they kind of extended the use of the tool a little bit, because you think about this one as, this is my budgetary allocation, we're tracking it, we're getting alerts, but also you can leverage it to track even credits against your particular consumption and have those same alert mechanisms in place. And Marcus made an excellent point on how you can actually track them all the way down to individual tags and subscriptions. So you can get very granular on those particular alerts, and that enables you to measure it all the way down to like a specific business unit or even a particular workload. So super flexible.
Great. So beyond just budgets and alerting within the Azure platform, there's actually a new preview feature within Azure Cost Management called Anomaly Detection. So anomaly detection alerts can actually now be set up in your Azure environment. So anomaly detection alerts are evaluating against subscriptions daily, looking at the forecasted total based on the last 60 days of usage. And so you can add additional recipients to these alerts. Today, it's really just looking at that anomaly by resource group level, but Microsoft will be adding additional scopes to apply those anomaly alerts to. And this is just the alerting piece here. You can actually also view your anomalies inside of the cost analysis preview screen. So if you go into Azure Cost Management and you click on Cost Analysis Preview, in any of those screens, you will see under the See Insights bar, there's a little box here underneath your average and total spend numbers that will show you, if any anomalies were detected, and you can click through and dive into those right from there. So the anomaly alert email, that you'll get if one of these anomalies is triggered, will include information about the cost delta, the top resource group changes for the day compared to the last 60 days, again, of spend, summary of changes in resource groups, count, and cost. And it will also send you a direct link into the Azure portal so you can dive deeper and drill into that anomaly to see what actually happened. This is really important for, being able to be reactive or more proactive and not, reactive at the end of the month. For example, I was working with a very large Fortune 100 oil and gas company that was actually testing a couple of third-party tools, and one of those tools had an anomaly detection capability, very similar to this. And what happened was this was actually over right around Thanksgiving holiday, and the day before Thanksgiving break, there was an engineer that was testing VM scale sets. And the engineer accidentally fat-fingered and made a typo, making their max scale set size 166 instead of 16. Big difference there. So he spun up that scale set and then forgot to turn it off over the holiday break. So we got an email alert, an anomaly detection alert on Thanksgiving saying that, for the VM scale set service, you had a spike of over 200% day over day growth. Which equated to, I think, around $15,000 or $20,000 at the time. So if we didn't get that alert and we weren't able to take action on that and send that email to that engineer and get that shut down, that would have been about a $100,000 mistake over that holiday weekend. So anomaly detection can save you a lot of headaches if you utilize it properly. Another way to drive accountability through FinOps is by identifying and leveraging KPIs. So there are some best practices from the State of FinOps report last year. One of the questions was, what are some of the KPIs that your team uses to drive that accountability and visibility and to track success of your FinOps practice? There's a few, suggestions here for some common KPIs, things like RI and saving plan usage versus on-demand usage. So if you're a crawl stage FinOps practice, very early on, maybe you're driving toward that 60% coverage. But as you mature and as you get better at RI management, about providing education around RIs, maybe you're going to start to target 75, 80% coverage, which obviously will help you to decrease your cost, but potentially could also introduce some risk to your organization. So you have to be very aware of that risk reward with RIs, and you should always leave yourself a little bit of a buffer. That's why typically run stage customers are still only shooting for 80% coverage. Because if you have any major workload changes, you don't want those RIs to go unused. Unused RIs is the equivalent of throwing money out the window. So some other KPIs to consider are things like amount of spend that should be allocated. So tagging coverage, maybe you're shooting for 80% tagging coverage as an organization. And then that additional 20% is part of that shared service model. Target variance between forecasted spend and actual spend is another major one we see. 15% was a pretty common response from most FinOps teams. Other KPIs to look at are things like cost per normalized compute hour. That's a really great one to monitor if you have an optimization priority or an optimization effort that's ongoing. Because if you're not driving that cost per normalized compute hour down, or at least keeping it flat, then clearly there are optimization opportunities either through right sizing or through driving down pricing through RIs and reserve capacity programs. Business revenue to cost and the creation of unit economics is also a very, very important KPI to start to think about. So think about from your business's perspective, what are some of the metrics that show if your business is being successful, and how do you relate that back to cloud and cloud spend? The number of recommendations being acted on. One of the biggest challenges to FinOps teams is getting engineers to actually take action on the data, on the recommendations that you're giving them. So that can be a good indicator of success. And then the Azure Advisor score is another great way to kind of gamify, optimization within your environment. And the Advisor score is a preview feature within Azure Advisor that tracks your progress over time, daily, weekly, monthly, annually, and will assess your workload or workloads against the 5 pillars of the well-architected framework, one of which is cost optimization. And you can actually use this to prioritize your recommendations, and each recommendation will have a weighted score impact. So you can start to prioritize these recommendations by ROI and by the biggest impact that they're going to have on your environment. All right, the next poll question is, does your organization use a showback or a chargeback methodology today, or do you not do either?
Yeah, which part of this is a trick question, because a lot of times I see customers starting with like a showback type of model as they work toward a chargeback. Starting with that level of transparency of spend back into the business units or organizations, so they're aware. And Microsoft took the same approach as we were slowly deprecating some of our smaller data centers that we had across the campus. Our IT organization started with the showback. This is the cost you're actually consuming for HVAC, energy consumption, footprint. So we were aware before they shifted into like a chargeback type of model. So sometimes you start with a showback to evolve into that direct chargeback type of scenario.
Yeah. All right, and it looks like
50-50.
Yeah, 50-50. Most folks aren't doing showback or chargeback today, and I'm actually surprised that chargeback was the one here that was 50% alongside of this and not showback. But that's great. All right, so we're getting towards the end of our session time here today, but you can continue to learn about FinOps. We're going to cover the optimization phase and the operate phase in our next 2 sessions. So very similar to this session, it's really going to be a deep dive into those specific activities and capabilities for that phase. Obviously, we encourage you to go out and get certified through the FinOps Foundation at learn.finops.org. And as well as continue to, explore options, with Insight and with Microsoft in ways that we can potentially help and partner with your organization. And then there's some additional resources to help you here. We did include the link for the installation link for the Azure Cost Management PowerBI template app. So that is available to anyone that wants to install that and leverage that tool. There's documentation on how to create and leverage the Azure Cost Management budgets and alerts, as well as use the new anomaly detection feature within ACM. And then, of course, we always encourage you as part of the inform phase to understand where you're at today and what your current maturity is. So there are some evaluation and assessment and benchmarking tools here as well that you can use to understand where some of those gaps might be in your organization today. All right, and I think there is a QR code here that you can scan to register for the rest of the series. as well as another code that you can scan to request follow-up, which we'll jump into here. But let's open it up to Q&A and take a look at some of the questions that have come in.
Cool. So one of the questions that popped up, it's more of a request, and I think we passed along the link to the cost anomaly detector. And so Alex had that question online, and yes, that's included in the slide decks, which will be downloadable and referenced on the Insights site.
Excellent. Somebody else earlier in the session asked if the dashboard tool has the ability to integrate costs from other applications and what the best practice is for multi-cloud environments. Two great questions there. The Azure Cost Dashboard, the template app tool, unfortunately does not have the ability to integrate spend from other applications because it is in the Power BI service. It is not a desktop file that you can download to customize. You would not be able to add additional data sources to that template app. However, you can utilize the Power BI native connector to pull in that Azure Cost Management data, and then you can pull in additional data sources if you go that custom connector route. For multi-cloud environments, there's a few different options. You can actually consume your AWS spend through Azure Cost Management. There is a fee to do that, but that data will then pull through directly through those APIs and feed into your Power BI reports as well. And there's also other ways that you can integrate those data sources. We've seen a lot of organizations create cost and usage reports out of AWS and then pull those into, maybe an Azure Blob Storage or a SQL database, or even run them through Azure Databricks to do some, advanced modeling and tuning of that data.
Yeah, one of my recommendations as you start getting exposed to that billing and usage data is certainly start with the Power BI cost management app on PowerBI.com, because it is a managed experience. It's not customizable, but it gets you exposed to some of the data and some of the potential reports that you can create. And then start looking at the Power BI desktop connectors, those native connectors. And I recommend that approach because it is a large set of data. It can be overwhelming initially. So starting with something that's initially easier to digest, that control experience, and through PowerBI.com with a cost management plugin or app. And then getting, as you want to customize it further, bringing in other data sets, or even connecting into your pre-existing budgetary allocation tools. That Power BI desktop application connector will get you that type of connectivity.
Yeah, there was another question too around, are the AWS and GCP dashboards materially similar? Unfortunately, there's no out-of-the-box Power BI dashboard that you can connect to, for AWS or for GCP. It does require some custom data, modeling data connections to be made to pull that data into Power BI. But there are, obviously, cloud provider specific solutions that they both offer that offer similar views and capabilities to the Power BI template app that you just saw.
Yep. Another question is, will we be recommending tags and resource group levels or doing a deeper dive into that? Which is a great question. I get that request from customers quite often is, what should my tagging taxonomy be? I did mention earlier, starting with those cost and profit centers that help you map into like the financial management flow of your CFO organization. That's a great first step. And we may roll into even the operate phase of one of our future webinars, a little bit more content into that and examples as well. So Marcus, we could probably loop some of that content into upcoming webinar sessions as well.
Yep, and there was that question around tagging too. That is a big topic, so we aren't going to get into that larger strategic topic today. But as far as how to arrange your tagging and kind of that decision-making matrix of how to utilize tagging, I would highly encourage you to leverage the cloud provider cloud adoption framework best practices and guidance. There's some really great suggestions around talk tracks, different tags for different functional areas that you may want to consider, and how best to apply those tags as well. So there's some great information out there within the Cloud Adoption Framework documentation.
Yeah. And keep in mind that you may start with one tagging hierarchy and shift it over time, depending on how your KPIs and measurements may change, as you mature that process. So certainly start with the tagging or the hierarchy that is well known. We leverage some of the financial budgetary allocations as a great example, and then evolve those over time, depending on how your measures of success actually change and evolve.
Yeah. And with anything like tagging or naming standards or Azure policy, a lot of those tools are really meant to drive human behavior. And if you don't have, good training materials, educational materials, plan for organizational change management, then a lot of times you are going to come up against change resistance when you are trying to prioritize things like tagging standards or naming standards, just because engineers have a lot on their plate today. And if you don't plan for that, you're going to struggle and you're going to have gaps in that tagging. You're going to have groups that aren't specifically adhering to that tagging standard. So it's very important to handle that with care, to communicate those changes broadly, to have executive sponsorship when you are communicating those changes, as well as training and best practice materials that you can send along with those requirements. That'll help you gain the best adoption with those tagging standards. Hopefully that helps.
Excellent. I'm not seeing any newer questions pop up. So before we let everyone go, I wanted to thank Marcus and Insight again. Marcus, it's always a pleasure working with you. I think you did the bulk of the effort in this particular session, and I hugely appreciate that. You're amazingly knowledgeable in the FinOps space. So it's been an absolute pleasure presenting, and I'm looking forward to our upcoming webinar sessions together as well.
Likewise, Jeff. As always, it's a pleasure, and thank you everyone for your attendance today, and we're looking forward to any follow-up feedback and questions from the group.
Thank you so much, Marcus and Jeff, for this great presentation, and thank you everyone for attending today. Please do remember to register for part 3 and 4 of the series. And yeah, that's about it. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.